President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. Again, the floor is given to the co-prosecutors to put questions to this witness. You may resume.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Witness, going back to the work you did at the Trapeang Tama Dam work site, would you say the work was easy or difficult, and why would you characterize it that way?
Of course, the work at the Tribunal Dam work site was difficult. It's not easy.
And what was it that made it most difficult for you?
First, it's the food ration. The food was not sufficient. A bowl of rice was for 4 workers, and they put a bowl of soup in the middle, and it was tasteless. It was a bit salty, but nothing else.
I think you mentioned before the break workers falling asleep leaning on their pickaxe handles or hoe handles. Can you tell us about that?
We fall asleep while we was working. For example, when it was my turn to dig the earth, then I put the earth into the basket, then the two people would carry the basket away, and when they returned, they would hit the hoe handle to wake me up, and I would do the same when it was their turn to dig the earth.
Did you ever see anyone collapse or die while they were working?
I saw workers who fell unconscious while they were carrying earth, and I also saw workers who died.
Can you describe for us what that looked like, what the workers looked like when they fell unconscious or when they died while doing their job?
Yes, I said they died because of overworked and because of insufficient food. We started working at 3 o'clock in the early morning, and we stopped at 11 a.m. for lunch when the bell rang, and then we had to work from 2 to 5 in the afternoon, and we only stopped for about 5 minutes, then we continued working until about 10 or 11 p.m.
The workers who you saw collapse and die, were those adults or children or both?
It was both children and adults.
Are you able to estimate how many times you saw that happening?
President, witness, please wait. And Counsel Copper, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. This witness is, as far as I recall, the first witness who seems to be implying that people died after they collapsed on the work site, but I'm not sure whether he actually means that. I think a distinction should be made to what he saw in the sense of people collapsing, and subsequently whether he actually saw then people die. I think he's making a conclusion, and so I think we should be very clear on this. And the prosecution should not try to put these two things together into one question.
Mr. President, I'll try to clarify that issue. Sir, for the workers who you believed died after they collapsed, what makes you think that they died?
They died after they collapsed. Some of them collapsed there, and then they tried to resuscitate the worker, but to no avail, and the person dies there on the spot, and some die from starvation, lack of food.
So is it correct that you watched them try to resuscitate the worker and you saw that they were unable to? Is that why you believe that these people died?
Please repeat your question.
Did you actually watch as attempts were made to resuscitate workers who had collapsed?
Yes, I saw it.
And you also saw that those attempts were unsuccessful, and that's how you know that those people died. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, that is correct.
I'd like to turn now to the question of work quotas. Can you tell us whether you had a work quota when you first started working at the Trapeang Tama Dam, or whether you had a work quota later at any point during your work there?
At the beginning, they only impose the working hours. For example, we started early and stopped at around 10 or 11. However, about a fortnight or a month after, the work quota was imposed. So we had to dig the earth in terms of meters of the land. And the work quota was imposed on a daily basis. And if you completed the work quota that day, then you would have your normal food ration. And if you could not, then your food ration would be reduced.
And who gave you your work quota? Who told you what your work quota was for a particular day?
It was the group chief and the unit chief who imposed the work quota and who reduced our food ration if we did not complete the work quota.
Did your group chief and unit chief tell you where they had gotten their assignments? In other words, did they tell you where these quotas ultimately came from?
From what I knew, I received the work plan from my group chief and unit chief who imposed the work quota upon us.
Do you remember what your work quota was on a typical day?
On the first day, we would be given a plot of 1 meter that day, and if we complete it, then they would increase it the next day to 1.5 and then to 2, for example. And if we could not complete it, then our food would be reused.
In your OCIJ statement, you use the term storm attack with respect to your work. Can you tell us what that meant?
The word storm attack was to work harder to complete the work planned, and that information was relayed to us during a big conference. They told us that the canal project had to be completed in 3 months.
You told us a few minutes ago that at the beginning you didn't have a quota, you just had working hours, and then later a quota was imposed. Did anyone tell you why they began to impose a quota? Did anyone explain why they were starting to impose a quota?
Please rephrase your question. I don't get it.
Yes, it's somewhat complicated. I'll try to make it simpler. At the beginning, there was no quota. Later, there was a quota. Did your group chief or unit chief tell you why they were starting to impose a quota?
At the beginning, the work was normal, but through their understanding, it did not proceed fast enough. For that reason, they measured the land that we had to dig. That is 1 cubic meter per day on that day. And if we completed that work quota that day, the next day would be 1.5 cubic meters per day. And if we did not complete, our food was reduced. And during the 2 or 3 months period, we worked non-stop. We had to attack the work until the project was completed on time.
Can you tell us how it was how your performance was monitored? How did your group chief and unit chief know whether you had met your quota or not?
They knew it because whether we completed the work quota or not, because some workers could not complete it as they fell ill, and for that reason they were criticized, and that they had to complete it the next day with that day quota. And that was the reason why some people collapsed while they were working because of the nature of overworked, and they were overexhausted.
Did you ever see anyone measuring the earth in any way to determine what constituted 1 cubic meter or 2 cubic meters?
It was my group chief who measured the land for us to dig.
You mentioned that you mentioned that the punishment for failing to meet your quota was to have your ration reduced. Was there any other punishment for failing to meet a quota?
we would be reprimanded once or twice, and if it happened the third time, then that worker would be tied and hang to a rope connected to a frame, a wooden frame. And after that, the person would be let off to go and continue the working again.
Can you describe that in a little bit more detail? Can you tell us exactly how the person would be tied to the wooden frame? By what part of their body? Using what kind of material?
The militia who had weapons and swords did this thing to the workers.
And when that was done, was it done in public? Was it done in the view of other workers?
Sometimes they let us see it. In fact, at the beginning, they did this at night time, and when the person returned, I asked what happened. Then he said that he had his feet tied and hung to a wooden frame. Then they dropped him off, and that after a few drops, then he was let go to return back. And if he kept continue doing that, he would be killed. That's how he was warned.
Do you know who gave him that warning? Did he tell you who told him that if he didn't change, he would be killed?
I actually asked that person, but he didn't dare to tell me because he didn't want the news to be spread out. He wept, and later on he was taken away and killed.
Did you ever attend any meetings where workers were criticized for failing to meet their quotas?
If my recollection is correct, every month or two a meeting was organized, and we were instructed to make our commitment to receive and accept the work plan and to complete the work plan jointly.
At any of those meetings, did you ever hear a phrase used, to keep you is no gain, to lose you is no loss? Did you ever hear those words or anything similar at a meeting?
Yes, I heard that phrase every day at the time. When they approach us, they would use such a phrase. They said that we were useless workers and it was no gain to keep us and it was no loss to remove us.
Who said that?
It was the militia, the group of people who had their weapons and swords. They were actually pretty young. They were children, not adults.
Did they say that at meetings, or did they tell you that while you were working? What was the context?
In the meeting, that message was also broadcast, and out of the meeting, outside, I mean, they also said these words.
And in the meeting, who was it who said those words?
He was referred to as the big chief, and from my recollection, his name was Tawal.
Can you estimate how many times you attended meetings where Taval was present?
I cannot remember it. Maybe it happened 2 or 3 times, and it varied. Sometimes it happened every fortnight. And actually, while we were in the mobile unit, we were happy to attend such a meeting because it means that we could rest.
Are you able to tell us what kind of person Taval was?
Please repeat your question.
Are you able to tell us what kind of person Taval was? Are you able to describe his character?
I was pretty young at the time, so I cannot tell you about his behavior or character.
Do you know whether he remained the chief of the work site during the whole time you were there, or do you know whether he was replaced at some point?
I do not know where he went when the regime fell in 1979, and to my recollection, he was there until the end of the regime.
Okay, I'd like to ask you now about working hours. You've already mentioned something about it. Specifically, you've mentioned something about 3 or 4 in the morning. Can you tell us whether that's the time you woke up, or is that the time you actually began work?
We woke up to work at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we continued working until 11 a.m. when we stopped for lunch. And we rested only about 10 or 15 minutes after lunch. We started working again until 5 p.m. where we stopped again for meal. And after meal, we had to work again until 10 o'clock at night.
And was nighttime work something you did every day, or was that occasional?
It happened every night. For example, during one full month that I was there, we worked every night, and we could only stop at 10 p.m. And then we had to wake up again at 3 a.m. The next day to continue the working.
And early in the morning and late at night, what was your source of light? How were you able to work before sunrise and after sunset?
They actually had light for us to work through the night.
I'd like to ask you now about your food ration. Can you tell us what your food ration was normally and what your food ration was when it was cut for failure to meet your quota?
There's a bowl of rice, and on top of that, there's a bowl of soup, and the bowl of rice was partitioned into four for 4 workers, and there were only about 2 or 3 ladles of rice that we could eat per each partition for each worker.
Did your weight stay the same during the time you were at the Trapeang Tamala Dam, or did you become more skinny or more fat?
While I was working there, I was so emaciated, and compared to the condition of sick people, now it's like you were sick from AIDS or HIV.
You've told us what your food ration was normally. What would your ration be when it was reduced if you failed to meet your quota?
President, Deputy International Co-Prosecutor, please hold on for a minute. There is a technical problem with the transcription machine.
បាទហើយដោយសារមានបញ្ហា
For technical reasons, the transcription machine is not working, and it will take quite a bit of time to repair it. So the chamber decides to adjourn, and we will resume on the 30th of September at 9 a.m. The chamber will hear witness Sotsopol. Parties, please come at the indicated time. Mr. Sotsopol, your testimony has not come to an end. The chamber requests you to come testify here tomorrow as of 9 a.m. Court officer, please bring witness Sotsopol back to his place of residence and bring him back to the courtroom tomorrow morning at 9. Security guard, please bring the accused Kyosompon and Nunchia back to the holding cell or to the detention center, corrects the interpreter, and bring them back to the courtroom tomorrow morning before 9. All right.